Welcome to the Smart Publishing Impact Series, where we show you how to turn your expertise into a book that actually drives results. I'm Jonathan Lautermilch, CEO of Smart Publishing.
And I'm Renée Lautermilch, Chief Editor of Smart Publishing. This is the podcast for business owners, coaches, and professionals who don't just want to be authors. They want to use a book to build authority, attract clients, and create real opportunities.
Each week, we break down what actually works when it comes to writing, publishing, and leveraging a book the right way. Sometimes it's just us pulling back the curtain on our process. Other times we're joined by authors, industry experts, sharing how they've used a book to grow their business. If you've ever thought about writing a book, or you already have one and want it to do more for you, you're in the right place. Let's get into it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Smart Publishing Impact Series. I am one of your hosts, Renée Lautermilch, Chief Editor with Smart Publishing, and I am joined by my co-host and my partner in crime, Jonathan Lautermilch, the CEO, head honcho, Smart Publishing. Say hi.
See, I'm glad I've conditioned you to my formal title after enough of these episodes. I've been planting head honcho with you for quite some time now. I'm glad you've accepted it.
El Jefe. El Jefe.
El Jefe.
So this is episode 62. We don't quite have a name for it yet, but we talk to our publishing partners, aka our authors, all the time about really great examples of books just based off of their genre. So we are more than publishers in what we do. We are also students of, publishing. I think one of the things I always do when I am in a bookstore or I'm around books, I don't know if you're like this, Jonathan, but I'm always noticing things, cover design, the way somebody does the back of the book, down to the formatting of things. And I'm always making all these mental notes that we can bring back to employ and use for mastery of our craft and what it is that we do, which is to help people bring their stories and their expertise to the world. So we're gonna get into that here in a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this today is obviously I've read books my whole life, right? So looking at books now after going, starting Smart Publishing, I have a totally different perspective now. I'm kind of looking back on books that maybe I read over 20 years ago, right? Versus when I read it then versus now. So, I thought it'd be fun to kind of break down and share some of those insights to kind of break them. Well, why was this book so impactful? And, kind of give some different examples for people out there for maybe some ideas what they're wanting to model for their own books.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Before we get into that, Jonathan, what was your favorite book as a kid?
I had two, or it was more of a series. So the first one was the Chronicles of Narnia. And I remember this is way before the movies came out. And I'll never forget, I was living with my dad and my sister in this townhome. And one of the things my dad started doing was actually starting to read those books to us, right? And once again, I don't know why he picked those books or how that started, but I just have a really fond memory of bedtime was he'd come in and read part of the book. And I remember at the end of each time, I was like, oh man, I gotta go to bed now. He's like, yep, sorry, bedtime. We'll pick up tomorrow night and where we left off on this. And we went through the whole series together. And that was why I was such a big fan of the movie series, so that when, we started getting Aria to watch movies, I was like, we gotta get her to watch the Chronicles of Narnia, which I totally plan on reading those books to her too. So that was the first series. And then obviously, if you're 90s kids, Goosebumps was the jam. R.L. Stine made hundreds of those books, and I actually got to the point where I didn't even get to read all of them because he was just pumping out so many. So I just started collecting them like Pokemon cards back then. I think I read up through the first 50 books, and there's two books out of that series which for some reason I still remember this day. One of them was Night of the Living Dummy, which was about the ventriloquist dummy that was basically Chucky. that came to life. And I remember that kind of scared the shit out of me as a kid. And then I forget the other one, but it was about this hamster that like had some sort of like green ooze it ate, and it mutated into this big giant like scary hamster, and the hamster was called Mr. Cuddles. Yeah. And that obviously that stuck in my head, like Mr. Cuddles. So like those are like the 2 books I remember out of that whole series. But I read like the first 50 of them.
Didn't you have a cat named Cuddles?
No.
What was your cat's name? The black and white one.
Miracle. Like not even
Miracle.
close. Not
That's
even
right.
close, dude.
I just wanted to know if you named your cat after Goosebumps.
I don't listen when you talk either. It's fine.
I definitely remember Night of the Living Dummy. I do not remember that bizarre hamster one. He did, yeah. I probably stopped somewhere in the 50s in his books, but I actually remember he came out with his first book that was oriented towards adults and not kids. And I remember getting it as a teenager thinking like, okay, cool. Maybe I could get back into his stuff.
I remember that.
Yeah, I think
It
I
didn't-
got
it
through
didn't
like
take
the first
off.
2 pages. No, it sucked. It was
Yeah.
not good. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, he had the formula for kids. He could not translate it into stuff for adults. I think Goosebumps was definitely a good favorite. Every single time we would have the Scholastic Book Fair roll into town, I'd always get the new ones
Dude,
and read through those in a matter of days.
I'll tell you, not on this episode, but like there's actually a really fascinating backstory of like what happened between him and his publishers, which was like 2 companies. There's actually a lot of drama that happened with that actually led to the falling out of R.L. Stine, because he was like on track of like global domination. He had merchandise, TV shows, all these different things. Anyway, we can put a footnote on that to like share that story, but I watched a documentary on it like a couple weeks ago. It was pretty fascinating, actually.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't know all of that, but yeah, I think Nickelodeon was where that show used to play. Oh, it was so bad. It was so bad. It was so good. I think one of the other ones that really had a mark on me, and I don't know if I would say that this was like in my favorite. It's definitely some of the most memorable, but probably for causing tons and tons of nightmares. Scary Stories
Oh, dude, yeah, that was a
to
good
Tell
one
in the
too.
Dark.
Yeah, dude,
Dude.
that book still gives me nightmares. Like, you remember the story about the spiders that like bit
In the
the girl's
cheek.
They
They were in her cheek. and
yeah,
like,
yeah,
came out-
yeah. No, I remember. I couldn't sleep for weeks.
Yeah. The little vampire that crawls through the girl's window at night and like sucks her blood. To this day, I do not like anything touching my neck. Ugh.
For me.
Stop. This is a PG rated. Well, actually, you said shit a little while ago, so I guess PG-13
I know
rated
my
show.
audience. I think we'll be fine.
All right, so let's get into the meat of
Yeah,
the show.
top
Looking at
5
books through a
books.
publisher lens. Yeah.
Top 5
yeah.
books. So I'll kick it off. So the first book that I read that had like a significant impact on me was Think and Grow Rich. I read that book when I was like 18 or 19. I'm 40, so that's over 20 years ago, right? And obviously reading it back then, I had very little context of like what makes a good book and why I even liked it. At that time, I just knew I wanted to grow, right? That's when I got first introduced to personal development, and my mentor at the time was like, you have to read this book. So it was more of a, not reading it for enjoyment, but reading it for information, for knowledge, right? So that was actually one of the first few books I was actually able to get through. Ironically, as a part of a publishing company, reading has something that's been more of a, I have to work at it, right? I like to take my content in by listening or watching, ideally. So if I read a book, it's because I'm real serious about reading that book. Anyway, looking back though, as I read that book, The things that I liked about it was the principles that were very clearly articulated throughout the chapters of the book, right? And I can't remember specifically off the top of my head like an example to give you, but for me, looking for something that I could apply and pull from that and like get real value from, because I wasn't reading it because I'm just trying to pass the time. I'm trying to actually get something I can go use, right? It was having those principles laid out in a way where I could get introduced to the information and then have context to how to apply it. Now, in terms of the story was okay, right? Obviously, it's about the guy who came up with, that whole thought process. So it's a very old book, to say the least. So once again, the story was good because it kind of pulls you in and gives you kind of a lens of how to look at this through someone else's life. And obviously, they're giving backstory on how this context came to life. But in all honesty, that wasn't really the part that really pulled me in. For me, I was honestly trying to get through that part so I could get to the meat of what I was looking for. So what that kind of makes me think of as a publisher is like, a lot of people that, especially people that we work with, are going to be looking for specific things that they can pull out. So how you design the book is going to be really important. They go, okay, how do I lace this so that it doesn't feel like someone's walking through the Sahara Desert to find the oasis of the gold nugget that they're looking through? And once again, Renee, I'm sure you've got a perspective on, could you do such a great job on weaving that into the story so it kind of gives them the breadcrumbs, right, as they're going along the way? Because I'll admit, there's definitely some chapters that I was like, God, when are we going to get to the point of what I'm trying to get from this? Because the story wasn't the most captivating, but the lessons and the value I got from it made it worthwhile for me to finish that book.
All right. So interesting that you kind of talk about how you're kind of going for the meat, right? I'm kind of a blend, but I really love the story. I love reading fiction, for example. I love a good story that pulls me in. And so when I'm sort of thinking about one of the first books that really stands out in my mind, and still remember the book today, it's actually in the memoir genre. It's a book called Wild Swans, and it is this woman who is detailing not just her own memoir, but the memoir of three generations of women in her family, including herself. So she's telling her grandmother's story, her mother's story, and her story across some really huge historical events in China, including the Cultural Revolution. And it's a really thick book. I mean, that book is like, it's like this. And I read it when I was like a teenager, I think. I was probably like 16, 17 when I read it. And it was one of my favorite books for a really long time. And I think it was the ability that the author and of course the editors do not get enough, credit for being behind the scenes and taking all the stuff out that the reader wouldn't have been engaged in. The author and the editor had just a really great ability to pull you into these women's stories, and it was different enough from anything that I had ever experienced being born in America, being born an American citizen, and in the 1980s coming up through the 1990s, to where it was just really fascinating. And the storytelling was so engaging. It wasn't just like, and this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. No, she painted the picture to where you could see her surroundings. You could smell the room, like the way that she brought these scenes and these people and these characters to life. You could almost like imagine the movie of it playing in your mind. And so reading it was almost like watching a movie in your head. And I think that is where, really great storytelling happens. I think some authors maybe don't know how to get to that level of detail. Other authors can tend to have this resistance to really telling their story. That we deal with that a lot. People who, if they really wanted to tell their story, they could, but they have this level of resistance to doing it. And I would just say, if you're an author, don't have that level of resistance. Also, if you don't remember all of those teeny tiny key details, it is okay to fabricate exaggerate some details. It's not lying to say that the bedspread was purple when maybe it might have been pink. What you're doing is you're trying to encapsulate your core message and your core story in the details that will bring it alive for people. And one of the biggest details is narrative conversation too. So instead of just like, and this person went and did that, and that person went and did that, start to go through the dialogue, create the dialogue of what the people were saying back and forth to each other so that the reader can really feel like they're there in that conversation. So if you're going to write memoir or you're going to write something that has storytelling in it, I would encourage you go get a really good memoir or even a really good fiction book and study it to see how those writers write to make you feel like you're part of the story and go and start to apply some of those skills in what you're doing.
No, that's a good point. You think about people who are great speakers. They don't just go up there and get right to the meat. They have a story that pulls you in and makes you feel like you're immersed in that moment with them, right? So definitely like adding that part is like really what takes a book from good to great. No, for sure. That's a great example and a great point. I'd say for book number 3 that we go over, and I think you remember when I read this book, this was back in 2014, 15, right around there. My mentor at the time recommended this book, Blue Ocean Strategies. And basically, it goes over the concept of blue ocean opportunities in business versus red ocean. Red ocean's going to be where you have all the competitors, thus why the water is red. And that's just doing a lot of things that other businesses are doing. And, once again, you can be successful in that venture, but you're going to have a lot of competition as you go through that. So the whole book breaks down, and what I really liked about this was the first book I read that actually did case studies, right? And one of the case studies they went over was Cirque du Soleil, right? And it talked about how at the time there was no other business or company that was offering that type of experience out there at all when they first started. You had ballets and performance type events, and then you had circuses, which were like totally separate. They were the first to innovate and create a blue ocean category where they combined the two seamlessly in one with one another. And now it's just one of the chapters and one of the examples where they broke down the history of Cirque du Soleil, and then they broke down the analytics and what that turned into them business wise, and really the thought and the mentality and the principles to pull from just that one example of different ways you can change your thinking about the type of company or business or opportunities that you're looking for as a small business owner or entrepreneur. And I just mentioned the Cirque du Soleil because that was like the one of the examples that stood out to me the most. But they had dozens throughout that book, and that book was definitely a best helper for me of like kind of shifting how I kind of navigate and view things, because I think the goal for anyone that's in business is how do I get into more blue ocean opportunities where I can kind of carve my own path versus rinsing and repeating and just trying to compete with what already has been done.
Yeah, no, good stuff. I think for book number 4, where I'm going to veer into, and we have a lot of Christian writers within our publishing partners that we work with a lot. It's actually a book that I'm reading now. Is probably going to be one of my all-time favorite books. So Gary Habermas was one of the premier, I would say, Christian apologists of our time, who academically in a secular university defended a thesis on basically defending the historical evidence for the case for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And if you go to his research volumes, I think there's like 3 total volumes that Gary has, and they are each like over 1,000 pages long. They're huge. But what he did with his co-writer, a guy named Michael, I want to say it's called Lincona. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his last name. But what he did with his co-writer is he distilled it down to a single book oriented towards laymen, not academic scholars. And, did it in, gosh, how many pages does this book have? 100 and I want to say, okay, 346 pages. So it's still a relatively big book. You wouldn't know it reading through. Now, what I'm going to orient this towards is people who have more sort of thought leader driven or research driven work. The way that Gary and Michael have written this book to create sort of this foundation of a case is impeccable. So if you are writing and you have sort of a position that you want to defend, so let's say that you think, I'm looking at the book behind you, Jonathan, that Bitcoin is a great investment. Well, that's a position that you need to defend and you need to create an airtight defense for it. It needs to be a really strong book to where you can take the reader along with you and why you believe what you believe. You show the evidence for why you believe what you believe. You cite different sources, you cite different references that are credible. In Gary's case, he even cites a lot of skeptics. He will take the skeptic's position and argue the skeptic's position and then show the counter position and why the skeptic position is actually the weak position. He just does a beautiful job of making this case. And by the time, I mean, I'm halfway through the book, so I'm not through the end of the book yet. But honestly, you could put the book now and be like, dang, Gary, you did it. When you first hear this title, you're like, how can you possibly, like, none of us were there. None of us saw it. There's no video footage or anything. But when he goes through what he goes through and the way that he develops the case, it is just a master class in what I would call defensive position writing, or writing that relies on credible sources and references. So if you're out there and you're writing a book where you're defending an idea or you're defending an opinion or you're defending a case for something, I would encourage you, check out his book, check out the way that he approaches it, the way that he structures it. It's so easy for a high schooler could easily get through this. It's so easy for anybody to follow along with what he's saying, and his logical and reasoning and the way that he structures that it's nothing short of just beautifully structured, a beautifully structured book and really sound writing where he gives you enough to rest the case without just giving you his 3 volumes of 1,000+ pages.
Yeah, well, I think the same can be applied to the blue ocean strategies with case studies too. Obviously, it's a slightly different angle on what you're doing, that you're not so much having to make a counter argument per se, but you're still going out there and you're researching and then pulling that research together and then developing it to demonstrate and make a case for whatever the subject of that book is. So while we're on the subject of that, what's your advice from an editor's perspective when it comes to, if someone wants to leverage case studies for demonstrating a concept, or in this case, demonstrating arguments and then overcoming counter arguments for a position?
Oh boy. Well, I will say that people who are coming from an academic background have an advantage here, and they have the advantage of already heavily researching their topic. So if you are coming from an academic background, particularly if somebody, we do quite a bit of dissertation repurposing here in our publishing work. So taking people who have written a dissertation and reinventing it and redoing it in a way that is designed for a general audience. I mean, that's sometimes years worth of research that goes into it. Where I think it is particularly weak is for people who have not really spent the time looking at all the different arguments. So this is where I'm giving a word of caution to anybody who's not coming at this with an extensive research background. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm saying don't do it this way. And this way is you already have a position, you already have something you strongly believe in, you're living in your echo chamber, and so you just seek out purely only those sources that strengthen your position and don't give air to anything else. That is going to be something to where if you want this book to be able to stand on its own, it needs to be able to refute the skeptics. It needs to be able to refute the people who are coming in and saying, yeah, well, this other study said this, or this other thing said that. So don't just find the things that are strengthening your position. Take a good, honest, empirical look at all the information that's out there. It may bring you to a better conclusion about what you're writing about, but it's going to be worth it, because if you're using this book to build your credibility and you don't do it in a credible way, it's going to backfire on you
Well,
100%.
well, what's cool now is with AI now, what you like, once again, as you said, it's so very true. We stay in our echo chambers where, yeah, you may know the 20 arguments for your case, but you don't know the 20 that are against it. I'm sure there's a way you could, use ChatGPT, for example, to help come up with those counter arguments and then find those sources. And then you could build that in to have the opposing side of it. Because you're right. If you're not addressing both sides, you're going to miss out on a good portion of the audience that could actually get value and get their perspective changed through the book.
100%. That's why Gary Habermas's book is so beautifully done. He goes and he finds the staunchest and the toughest skeptical arguments against what he's arguing for. He lays them out like he is the skeptic. He lays them out like he is the skeptic. And then he point by point goes through and logically and with data and facts picks them apart to show where their weaknesses lie. So it's going to take you longer, but if you're writing a book that is like that, it is worth the time, because again, you don't want to spend all this time and then people are very easily able to pick apart your work. It's going to be frustrating and demoralizing. And like I said, it's going to do the opposite of create credibility. It's going to undermine your credibility.
Absolutely. All right. So number 5, to top off the list, and when I'm going to talk about, Renee, I talk about this book all the time. It's Extreme Ownership. Extreme Ownership. Extreme Ownership. I cannot recommend that book enough. I will talk about that book until the day I die. And it's because it encompasses, I believe, all the different value points that we're talking about today, right? It's got captivating stories for each chapter that draw you in, and it has the details so you feel like you're actually in that moment. And it has a clear principle that, like, this is what I want you to take away from this. And then there's even actionable breakdown to make it for dummies like me going, hey, how do I actually use this and apply this? It even has a short breakdown after each chapter, right? And I think it also solves a big challenge that a lot of people have when they go story first and principle second, is it's so easy to get lost in the weeds of a good story, because you don't know what parts do I leave in, what parts do I leave out, how do I round this out to drive home this singular point, versus if you focus on the principle, like what are the key things that I really want the reader to take away, and you use that as like your internal ChatGPT prompt to go, what stories best align with this? I found that it just creates a ton of clarity, not just for the reader, but for the actual author, to get their full, complete thoughts out and to really make sure that's a valuable book. And like I said, there's a reason I talk about this book every opportunity I get. I've read it multiple times. And as I've admitted earlier, I am not the most gung-ho reader, ironically, as a publishing company, but I do love books and I do love the power that they have for people. And if that book wasn't written that way, there's no way I would have read it multiple times, where I've read that book over the span of several years. And each time I read it, I pick up something new as I go through it, because I'm in a different season in my life. And I think that's also important for anyone that's going to write a book, is the longevity of it. Is this something that someone's going to be able to read one time and get value from? Or is it going to be something that they can constantly come back to throughout their life? And because they're in a different season, now they can see a different perspective and pull out something new. So it's like almost getting a Christmas present, rewrapping it and opening it again and getting the same great experience all over again, because you're in a different season of your life.
Yeah, and funny enough, and so I'm a voracious reader. Like, I'm always reading something. And of course, being an editor, I'm reading, people's work all the time as well. But like you just heard on the side, I'm reading books, I've actually never read Extreme Ownership. I listened to the audiobook. I rarely listen to audiobooks because I prefer to read. So I'm the exact opposite of Jonathan. But the way that they did that audiobook was even beautiful because it's Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. And first of all, these guys just have like really cool voices, especially
Yeah.
Leif. Leif Babin has just like this total badass voice. So these guys, they interchange the chapters. Jocko's doing one, Leif is doing another. And when they're telling the story, like you feel like you're like sitting around with these guys, and they're telling all their old war stories, directly to you. And man, that audiobook just sucks you in. Yeah, I agree. So, if you're listening to this, the one thing that I want you to know is what we're getting to is there are strengths of certain types of nonfiction genre that lend themselves well based on what genre you're writing in. So, what we don't mean is that there is a one size fits all approach for
Right.
everybody who is writing nonfiction. An extreme ownership type approach may work for some people. It may not completely work for somebody who, honestly, their book is like, 80% memoir with lessons that can be extracted from it, but it's not like I'm going to go use this in business because, we do have some people who have written on trauma, and that's really a different sort of genre. That's a genre that other people who have experienced trauma, or even people who are close to people who have experienced trauma, when you're reading that, you're more so reading it for, if you're the person with trauma, it's this level of validation, it's this level of non-isolation, I'm not alone, and then for those who are close to someone who's experienced trauma, it's almost a level of getting to sort of understand how that person has been affected by the things in their past, which can then translate to much better empathy. I will say my, empathy, wonders can be done for one's empathy reading books in that genre. But again, you're not going to get to the part, well, how do you apply? How do you apply
Right.
this in business?
So,
That's not going to work for that necessarily. So
well,
pick up, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, whatever your idea is, I guarantee there's a book that's been written that's similar that you can emulate or at least get inspiration from the structure. Because every great book that we all listed had a consistent structure. Chapter 1 was formulated just like chapter 2, just like chapter 3. And once again, the stories may change, or the principles, or whatever, or case studies, or research, or
And they don't all have
memoir.
to be the same length. They don't all have to be the same
Yeah, they
page
don't have to
length.
be the same. So that's not what I meant by structure, right? But it's got a flow to it, right? The whole point is you want to figure out what's that structure that most resonates with, once again, your style, but also what's your end goal? What are you wanting to get across for the impact for that reader through your story or through the lessons, whatever that may be. And once again, as Renee said, there's not a one size fits all, but I would challenge you, if you like, I don't know what I'm looking for at all, well, go out there and read some books that are in the genre that you're looking to do. And I guarantee you'll get some inspiration from it. Just like extreme ownership, I'm very passionate about, and it ends up being a great play for a lot of our publishing partners to emulate because of the structure and the flow. And just like Renee was sharing with more of the memoir style, we've had a lot of people with trauma and abuse type stories, but once again, we've got a template that flows for articulating that. And then we've got ones that are more like case studies. So once again, figure out that template for you, but go out there and consume some books and get some inspiration from it. And once again, don't necessarily copy them, but you can use it to emulate for sure.
And I think the last thing I'll say on that is get perspective in your corner too. What we see is a lot of authors are just too close to their material and are not experienced in writing books. Many of our folks are first time authors, even the ones who aren't first time authors. There is this level of perspective that's absolutely critical to making sure that you're pulling out the right parts, you're structuring it in a certain way, even if it's not us Go find somebody on Fiverr. Just find somebody out there who is experienced in editing, structuring books. Maybe it's somebody who's written a few books. That will be invaluable in helping you to take a step back from the material and see it in a whole different way, because you have no idea how many people will come to me and there are these things that they're thinking about keeping out of their book, where I'm like, why would you ever keep that out of your book? This right here is gold. We have to put this into the book. Or oftentimes it's like, well, I don't know if there's any value in this. And it's like, wow, there's tons of value in that. Yes. And if they had sort of been their own level of perspective, you can't see from within the glass. You can't see from within the
Yeah.
frame. You need someone who's outside of the frame looking in to see the things that you just can't see because you're you and you're too close to your material.
Amen to that. So let's do this as we land the plane this episode. I want you to name one book you thought was going to be great that came up a disappointment.
It was that R.L. Stine book. That thing sucked.
That one? Well,
I was so pumped for that. I think my mom bought it for my birthday or something because I was like, yeah, I'm going to be able to reconnect with R.L. Stine now that I'm too old to read Goosebumps. And man, it was trash.
Well, I'm going to say something that's controversial. David Goggins' book was meh, in my opinion. And I know I'm going to get a bunch of people hating on me for, because David Goggins stay hard. I get it. And that book, I read 2/3 of it. I didn't finish it because the last couple chapters were literally him just repeating the same story. And I think we talked about this on a past episode on how that probably happened because publisher was forcing a page count and the content wasn't there.
Yep.
So it just ended up it's like it was like Saved by the Bell when they'd have that filler episode and they're like, let's look at all the memories from this season. You're like, this episode sucks. And then they just did that to give the writers a break for a week because they ran out of content, right? That's what it felt like reading David Goggins' book. There's only so many times you can tell that story where it's like, I get it, dude. Like, you do extreme stuff and you ran till your toes became nubs and you did 2,000 pull-ups. I get it. So that was a book that, once again, as I got it, I'm like, oh, this is going to be great because everyone's reading it and everyone's all juiced up on David Goggins. And I read it, and honestly, I wasn't that impressed.
A lot of hype. Yeah. He either had a crappy editor, which I highly doubt when you're writing a book at that level where it's ending up New York Times bestseller, which is a rigged list anyways, but I won't get into that. When you're at that level, you're going to have a really good editor. But yeah, there are traditional publishing mandates, like a novel has to have 90,000 words minimum. Based on the genre, you have to have a minimum amount of words. And that comes from, I did an entire episode on this. It comes from all of their data that says, if I want to sell this book at this price point, which is what we need to sell it out to get an ROI on this project, it needs to be this thick because our market testing data shows that it has to be this thick for a potential buyer to think that it's worth that amount of money. But the problem is then you get it and then half of it's filler and it's non-value added content. So you just paid all this stuff for a paperweight.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Yeah.
This was nice.
It would be fun hate comments I get from that. And some David Goggins wannabe is going to come talk trash in my DM now. Bring it on. I stand by my statement.
Some R.L. Stine lover is going to come talk trash to me
Oh
about
my
how
God.
his first adult book was so good.
That book changed my life. What are you talking about?
Nobody even remembers what it was called. I'm going to have to go look it up
No.
on Amazon just to see.
No,
if
I
can
remember because they
find it.
marketed for that age group. It was like young teens, and I was just like underneath that age bucket because it was like, because you and my sister are the same age, so like y'all were at that one incremental leap in life where like our lives were totally different, even though we're only a couple years apart.
Oh man, well, if you got value out of this episode, or even if this episode pissed you off, hit subscribe so Jonathan can make you mad even more when he talks about how he didn't like David Goggins' book in the future if he mentions that. But no, for real, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast, hit that subscribe button. Tell somebody that you know who could benefit from this content. We always love questions. You can put them in the comments for this podcast. We check them out occasionally. We love answering listener questions every so few episodes. We are going to be having a guest episode on our next one. We're going to have Dr. Carter Check on here, one of our publishing partners. He is about to come out with his second book. He's written like 50,000 books. Legit. Like this guy writes a book a week.
It's not published yet.
It's going to be his second published book that's going to be coming up. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And this guy is a mover and a shaker. He's doing all kinds of things as a published author, and we just want him to share the wisdom. So make sure that you catch next week's episode when it drops next Thursday. It's going to be an awesome one. If you would do us the honor, we would be so appreciative if you would take 60 seconds to rate and review this show. It helps it get in front of more people who could benefit from our content. You can find us on Facebook, Lautermilch, Lautermilch, Lautermilch.
Who are you?
Lautermilch.
Well,
Renee,
that does it,
I'm
folks.
Renee. He's Jonathan. He's also on LinkedIn, and you can also find us at smartpublishingservices.com. Any parting words? You might be able to talk better than me at this point.
I think we need to quit while we're slightly ahead.
I think you're right. All right. Like I always say, keep writing your story because the world needs your voice. Until next time.